identities. Diversity that is based on experiences that shape our lives. What are our abilities? What is our culture, our hobbies, our disabilities, socioeconomic status? And then cognitive diversity. This is diversity of aspiration, identities of aspiration. We seek out people similar to us, or what we aspire to in terms of education, learning preferences, occupation, and personalities. And that being said, this is a deep classification scheme that we find in the journals, but in real life, it doesn't always apply, because these classifications, they overlap, and diversity is dynamic, it's continually changing, and it's continually evolving, it's multidimensional. And this is our multidimensional layer diagram of diversity. We have identity and primary and secondary diversity, which we pretty much looked at with the classifications on the prior slide. But then there's organizational, has to do with where we work, our role in the company, tenure or non-tenure, cultural, body linguistic, inclusion. Inclusion is countable. I can count in this room how many white males are participating in this talk, how many Hispanic females, how many African Americans. And inclusion efforts in the workplace or the university traditionally target those groups that are underrepresented, okay? And they do so by inclusive actions, policies that create a comfortable environment for people to become involved and express their ideas and interact with others. This differs from inclusivity. Okay? Inclusivity cannot be counted. Okay? This is a policy or practice of accepting all groups, not tolerating groups, but accepting them into the environment or institution. And again, traditionally, these policies are targeted against those people with disabilities, those underrepresented groups in schools and universities and other agencies. What are the benefits of diversity? Well, we just have to kind of think about it. If you look in the journals, they list most of the benefits as related to the corporate arena. But this also translates into the college and university environment. So, if a corporation is more ethically diverse, they tend to have a higher revenue. In the same vein, if the university and its faculty are more ethically diverse, they tend to matriculate a more diverse student body and a larger student body, and that translates into higher tuition dollars, higher income. Okay? We can talk about increased earnings before taxes. I like number 3 though. There's a positive relationship between diversity and innovation. And if you think about this, this is nothing new. We've seen this in the health profession for a very long time. We talk about the interdisciplinary healthcare team. It's a diverse array of professionals in different healthcare fields with different skills and different knowledge sets that come together to innovate together to provide the best treatment for the patient. Those institutions that are more diverse are more likely to capture new markets. And those institutions that are more diverse have employees that feel included. And if you feel included, you are more likely to rate your university or your institution as satisfactory if you don't feel included. Then you are also not as likely to go out and express to others that your university is inclusive. And then that adversely affects recruitment into the ranks. We can talk more and more about revenue, but the conclusion here is that diversity and inclusion are responsibilities. They are social, ethical, and political responsibilities, as well as moral responsibilities. Affirmative action. researched this too. This was started in 1961 via executive order by President John F. Kennedy. And it was an initiative to equal the playing field in governmental agencies by creating opportunities for underrepresented minorities. And eventually it expanded to universities and colleges and other agencies. And historically, again, it targets underrepresented groups. Affirmative action, if you go through and count the number of executive orders and the acts by Congress, the affirmative action law has been modified in attempts to make it more effective 49 times since it was established in 1961. And it certainly has some advantages. It has increased, to an extent, diversity in the workplace and institutional diversity. It attracts a new customer base in the corporate arena. And it helps job seekers, and students who need racial preference to gain admission or employment. I think this is wrong here, because I don't think any person or any student should require racial preference to gain admission or employment. It should not be a requirement at all. But there are some disadvantages that are created. Affirmative action creates a stigma. In some instances, there's a perception of discrimination. In academia, it kind of creates a mismatch between low grades and high dropout rates with underrepresented groups. And we see this in the colleges, where we have students from underrepresented groups that are omitted. And for one reason or another, some of them don't have the skills necessary to achieve the high grades that their peers have. A good example would be at one of the medical schools that I taught at, where a student was failing anatomy, minority student. And I asked them, come to my office and bring your learning resources. So they bring the textbook. And I thought that was rare to begin with, because today it seems like they don't read the textbook. It's all Dr. Yahoo and Dr. Google and these other things, instant gratification. And I looked at the text, the pages of text. They were all yellow. There was not one single word that was not highlighted yellow, which told me that the student did not have the reading skills necessary to pull out the essential or critical information that they needed. And unfortunately, by the time they get to us, that's too late. We don't have the time to teach them how to do that. Okay? But that's just an example. But also, affirmative action fails to address issues that underlie the lack of diversity and inclusion. Okay? Things like hunger, things like economics, faculty retention, faculty salaries, outreach programs. So what affirmative action has really become is a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid for the disease, but it's not addressing the underlying factors that cause the disease. So the problem, since 1961, there's been little change in the diversity of basic science faculty at the university or college level. There's been progress, certainly, and mostly in the increase in the number of women professors. Okay? But there's gaps that still coexist. And if we look at basic science faculty at the medical school level, the situation is even worse. There's more of a disparity. And then if we pull out and focus in on anatomy and physiology faculty, the situation becomes that much worse. And my theory about that is that anatomy and physiology courses are very, very time intensive. I think they are the two most intensive courses in the basic sciences. And many institutions require you to do research, either at the lab bench or educational research, in order for you to be promoted or retain your position or obtain tenure. And with the academic loads, you often don't have time when you're teaching anatomy or physiology to do the research, to achieve the goal. And then you're out, which also affects our ranks. So we have to work on this, and we also have to understand that faculty diversity is related to our student diversity and the cultural competence of our graduates and an inclusive campus environment. What are the factors that complicate all this? Lack of funding. You don't bring in the bacon, you don't get the tenure, you don't have your job. Okay? And some of the positions at universities, you have to bring in the bacon because you pay for your own salary and for your own research space. Okay? Academic load, I just spoke about that. Our profession, fortunately or unfortunately, it's the nature of the game. It's a very high academic load. Some of our courses have more than 200 or 300 students in them at any one time. Curricular reform, that's been a big thing that's been going on, especially in the last 8 or 10 years in the United States. And we're moving away from a didactic approach to more student-centered learning, small groups, less laboratory, less lecture time. Do more with less faculty. Other things, George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement. These things, and like the tragedies we've witnessed on the news in the past few weeks, just horrible news, they increase our awareness about disparity, about diversity and inclusion. But at the same time, there are some elements that also increase divisiveness. And then in the past few years, we've had COVID-19 to deal with. And we were thrust into this arena where we had to do much of our teaching remotely. And many students like that. There's some that don't like that. But it also gives administrators the idea, maybe we don't need faculty. I think that's wrong, but I also had a dean tell me once, if I put a medical student in a room and I give them the books and beam in the lectures, I don't need the faculty. I can come back in 4 years and open the door and I will have an MD. I think it's a very disturbing philosophy because faculty have many things to offer other than just what they offer during a didactic session. And there's much to be gained by interacting in the classroom or laboratory setting. This slide I hesitated to show to you, but I'm here for guiding to use, so I'm going to include it anyways. If you want to start trucking at Walmart with no experience and no debt, you start at $95,000 a year. And they will train you to drive the truck. Why go get your PhD? You can be a plumber. They train you on the job now because there's no vocational schools. You start at $78,000 a year, no debt. And the person then picks up the garbage at the end of your driveway, $56,000 a year, no debt, no experience. Yet, when you come out as a postdoc today with your degree, you start at around $37,000 a year. That's average. Okay? And your debt, the average debt is $160,000 in the home. And you have to compete to get funding, to get grants, to publish, to get the tenure. Although a lot of institutions are also doing away with tenure. It's scary. It makes you think twice. And it makes it hard to recruit people to go into the profession. And if you take all this out of it, okay, and you take out all the numbers that adversely affect this from the COVID-19 pandemic, the literature shows that today there are 1.7 million less students seeking college degrees than This is a serious problem. It not only adversely affects diversity and inclusion in student bodies and within our ranks as basic science faculty, it's affecting our future because we can't produce the engineers, we can't produce the anatomists, the physiologists, the educators, the researchers. We're going to fall behind. We're going to fall behind not only because we can't produce them by drawing them into the university, we can't produce the faculty needed to teach them. So it's a big problem and something that needs to be addressed. Okay, these are some of the references I looked at, relatively few of them, to facilitate my discussion here. And I'm not going to bore you by showing graph after graph after graph, okay? But I thought I should show you a few. Okay? And if you look through the journals, basically the graphs show the same thing, whatever journal you're looking at. Okay? And I concentrate on medical schools because that's what I'm most familiar with in the basic science faculty. And it's the same at undergraduate universities and institutions, but a little bit worse at the medical school level. Okay? And we've seen a growth in the size of faculty. Okay? And we've seen that at all the ranks with an increase in diversity. And we've seen more of this at the clinical level at all the ranks, rather than at the basic science level. So there's some disparity there that we're not addressing. And if we look at this graph, okay, we look at the diversity, okay, but we look at it based on ethnicity or race. Get my pointer here. And for whites or Caucasians, diversity has gone down. That makes sense because there's been an effort to increase with the ranks of other underrepresented groups. If we go down here, okay, the least group that has increased is African Americans. Okay? And again, no Indian Americans are even represented in any of the graphs of any of the journals that I looked at. We look at this graph, the number of female faculty have increased. But what's interesting, the increase is even less at the full professor level. You have to think, why is that? And actually, I looked at some NIH data for that, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And females, for whatever reason, are less likely to be funded with the R01s and less likely to receive competitive funding and less likely then to refile or file a new grant after they've been funded. This is a really interesting graph. It looks at the number of male and female faculty in basic sciences, Asian versus African American, Hispanic and white. And like the other graph, the number of whites has gone down because we're concentrating on increasing the numbers from underrepresented groups. What's interesting though, Hispanic levels have gone up, but not that much. And when we look at African Americans, okay, the number of females have gone up, not by much, but they've increased. Whereas the number of male African Americans in basic sciences has stayed relatively constant, has not increased. So again, there's a disparity that we're not addressing in terms of the diversity and the inclusiveness. This table shows women and racial and ethnic minorities in tenured or non-tenured positions. And again, the big discrepancy is here with Black and African Americans. And these numbers here decrease even further if we take out those graduates and those employees, those faculty from the primarily Black institutions. So what are the workplace problems, or what might be workplace problems in basic sciences that lead us to less diversity? And certainly one of them is overt bias. Okay? And this can occur during the hiring process. unconscious bias. We all have them. Okay? It's good we can leave them at the door, outside, and not in the work environment. Then there's the requirement to generate income, that R01. Used to be that you looked at the person's qualifications, they had an impressive CV, and the search committee was willing to take a bet. You know, that after 4 or 5 years, you'd land that R01, then 2 years later, you'd apply for tenure, and you'd achieve tenure. That's not the case anymore. Universities are suffering. They're not bringing in the enrollment. 1.7 million less students than prior to COVID enrolled in universities and colleges in the United States. Okay? So, they're not willing to make the bet anymore. You bring in the bacon, or it's goodbye. Okay? Women are usually funded, but they're funded for less money. It takes them longer to achieve that first R01. They're less likely to get competitive or renewal, and they're less likely to follow that first research grant that's approved with a subsequent project from the same PI. This table shows us the diversity in the faculty body of U.S. universities and medical schools. But the thing to get from it is that these numbers, they don't reflect the increase in diversity of the U.S. population. So we don't represent the diversity of the groups, the social groups around us. And it may indicate that there are barriers that we have yet to recognize to mobility from going to one rank to the other, as well as barriers in recruitment. Affirmative action, again, may fail to address underlying aspects of disparity. Do schools fail to attract and retain expert faculty to encourage youth in STEM? And the answer is yes, especially in the urban setting in low-income areas. In preparation for this talk, I went back to the Gary School System and had sit-down sessions with students and faculty. Okay? And they don't retain faculty. It's a constant turnover. It's very difficult to be inspired when the faculty are not inspired to stay and do their job. There's financial compensation issues. You don't get paid very well in the urban environment. You don't have a lot of teaching resources sometimes. And if you don't have the teaching resources, your students are discouraged, and you're discouraged. Faculty development is often lacking. Safety. Again, we've seen some horrible things on the news. It's difficult to teach your class and encourage them to seek careers in science or anything for that matter when you have to worry about having your brains blown out. Not a good thing. Mentoring. Faculty don't often have time to mentor students or each other, but it is a role that we have. It's part of who we are, and I think most of us enjoy doing that. And then addressing student problems inside and outside the classroom. Why is the student tired and laying over the center of the lab bench while I'm talking to them about the lab exercise that they're going to execute today? Maybe I'm boring with my talk. That's possible and sometimes probably true. Why are they hungry? I've been in the Gary schools where they actually give box lunches to the students to take home for dinner, multiple lunches, because the families don't have enough to eat. And again, you have a student with an empty belly. They're not going to learn anything. Gun violence, gang violence, lack of food, lack of medical care, lack of money, lack of resources in and outside the classroom. All of these things need to be addressed, or we can't not solve the problems of diversity and inclusion. So what's the solution? I have the solution. I don't. Okay? But we can help groups move through educational pipelines through mentoring, through tutoring, and other resources. We can sit on selection committees and promote diversity and inclusion, just not for student admissions, okay, but for recruitment of faculty. Criteria for admissions can also be disproportionate for disadvantaged applicants. Right? There's that checkbox on the application. Do you represent a minority group? Check the box. And in many institutions, you're taking off the, I hate to use the word normal, I'll use the word regular admissions list. Put on a separate admissions list and guaranteed an interview regardless of scores, MCAT score, regardless of personal statement, regardless of grades. Personally, I don't think that's right, but it's part of the way with affirmative action that we attempt to resolve the issue. And I've asked my nursing student, she's a nice young lady, African-American young lady. I told her I was doing this talk, and I was very nervous about it. Can I sit down and talk to you and ask you some questions? And she said, sure. And I sat down with her. I said, what's different about you? Why are you going into the medical sciences? Why are you here taking anatomy and physiology 11? I said, why not just check the box? She says she doesn't believe in checking the box, that she should be able to accomplish this on her own merit. And I respect that. And I also respect the person that checks the box. You use everything in your arsenal to get in, but then once you are in, you show that you can do the work. So again, I asked her, what's different about you? And she turned to me and she said, I had inspiration. That word showed up again. I had inspiration. There were faculty that took their time and showed an interest in me. And they encouraged me to go in a certain direction. Inspiration. Getting back to my slide, there are salary discrepancies. The pipeline of basic science, it's leaking. Sure, we might go out to the grade school and do a seminar, or you can go show them Plasty and Hart to pique their interest. But is there follow-up after we leave? Once a minority student checks the box and they get into medical school, is there follow-up to make sure that that student isn't faltering along the way and getting the resources that they need to achieve and complete the job? Same if we go for a PhD. Are the resources there so that we can increase the diversity and the ranks of anatomy and physiology faculty? What can we do? What can you do? Inspiration. I think that's the greatest, the strongest weapon in our arsenal at this point to promote diversity and inclusion. And there's many ways to do this. Be a mentor. Inspire students. Inspire your colleagues. Work with them and encourage them. Volunteer. Volunteer your time. More things for us to do with our already overloaded workloads. But you can integrate something in, one thing that you volunteer with maybe each semester. Whether it's sitting on a committee for diversity and inclusion, sitting on a search committee, going out and doing some volunteer community service at your local high school, local grade school. Right? Inspire students at all levels. Build a pipeline. This is really important. We have to develop pipelines, programs that are outreach programs to educate students about anatomy and physiology, about careers in anatomy and physiology, and the importance of careers as faculty members in basic science departments. Without us, architecture is doomed, medicine is doomed, chemical industry is doomed. Celebrate the achievements of colleagues and students. In some institutions, the thinking is now that we don't do that. In one institution that I worked at, I was told, you do not recognize one student in front of the entire class of students for their achievement, because that is calling out the student and setting them apart differently from their peers. When I thought about that, I thought it was wrong. But sometimes we have to do what we're told from leadership, and that's okay. But if you think about it, that's not what happens in the real world. People get congratulated for their achievements, our colleagues. But I guess you can take it two ways. You can be angry about it. That should have been me, not him or not her. Okay? Or you can congratulate them on their achievement and rejoice in that, and them as being part of your team. And that helps encourage innovation and creativity and work together and diversity. Build a team. That's a little bit more difficult, because you have to recruit to do that. And that kind of goes back to the pipeline. Be a leader. Check your biases. We all have them. It's human nature. If you can't check them at the door, then control them. Easy enough. So what do we conclude? Nothing is ever going to be truly equal. Okay? Although we are increasing diversity and inclusion. And diversity has many facets. It is multifactorial. It includes all those things that I pointed out, and likely many more that I haven't addressed here. It's important to have diverse groups, because diverse groups have individuals with complementary skill sets, and they're better equipped to address issues in education, as well as healthcare disparities. Be a role model for diversity and inclusion, inspiration, and develop a pipeline. Inspiration, teaching, promoting interest and inclusion. What are the benefits? We have inclusion and diversity. We have better science, better anatomy and physiology. And what does that affect? It enriches the benefits in society. There's more effective translation into education, into industry, into medicine. And there's a better environment in the workforce. It's my last slide, well, almost my last slide. Inspiration. About 2 years before his death, twice, I had the opportunity to meet Superman, my childhood hero. How many people can say that? I not only met him, I was able to sit down and have a good conversation with him twice. Chris Reeve, very inspirational person. Okay? Superman was all inclusive. It was all about including everyone, no matter what race, no matter what gender, wherever they were from. He inspired hope. Okay? Be a Superman. Be a super person. Inspire others. Empower yourself and your colleagues and your mentees. Be a leader. Have persistence of vision. Soar to new heights. And all of these things, if you do them, will make a difference. They'll make a difference for our students. And they'll make a difference in the diversity of our faculty ranks. I'd like to acknowledge a couple people before I close here. Reverend Father Powell, Chief Stone Forehead of the Cherokee Nation. Daniel Fesco and his students from 21st Century Charter School in Gary, Indiana. And my anatomy and physiology students at Purdue University Northwest. Dr. Tak Nguyen, who is the Dean and Provost of the Tan Tam University School of Medicine in Vietnam. Brittany Roberts, of course. Cheryl Purvis, for asking me to do something here today, and Carol Briston for being my HAPS liaison. I appreciate what you've done for me and your nice introduction. No support for this kind of talk, okay? And it's been my privilege and my pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and I welcome any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them, and I'll do my best to give you a good answer. Thank you. Can you talk a little louder, please? Thank you.
My question is, if a policy like affirmative action works, and this minority students that might not have shown the same degree of academic excellence can just check the box and be admitted into medical schools, then why don't we have increased minorities as physicians, as attending physicians in medical schools, as residents? If all they needed to do was to check a box and not demonstrate the same level of academic excellence, why has that not fixed the problem?
I think it's multifactorial. It's not just about checking the box. If you check the box, yes, in many schools you're taken off the regular admissions list and put on a separate admissions list. But once you get in, you also have to be able to do the work. Okay? It is not just minorities, it's other students too, but we tend to see it more frequently in underrepresented groups where there's more difficulty in achieving and doing the work. And those that do move on successfully, okay, sometimes they don't, they have difficulties in residency and beyond. And where there might be programs to address these issues at the university level, often they're not there when they go into residency at the hospital. So there's some difficulty and they tend to drop out at that point or before.
I just wanted to add a little comment to that and question. I think that we always have to be mindful to do more to help these kids navigate. Because if you don't have role models and you don't have people to look to know how to navigate the university system or the medical school system, what's expected, how to be successful, it's incredibly difficult. And I work at CSU, so it's not a medical school, but we find that our underrepresented students, they just don't have the skills to know how to be a student. And a lot of that is about knowing that they have access to healthcare on campus, knowing that they have access to a food bank, to housing, to counseling services, all those sorts of things. I've had students who thought that office hours meant that's when the faculty wanted to work in their office, and so please don't come by. And so providing those translations and helping these kids to navigate is probably one of the most important things I think in helping anybody who gets in to then be successful in the program and go on to be the mentors for the people who come after them.
Thank you. Very good points.
Excuse me, Leonard. Okay, So I think it's very important for us to realize that yes, programs like affirmative action exist, and yes, diversity is something that is important, but we also don't want to spread that message and that bias that individuals that are minorities get into programs like medical schools just because of the basis of their race and because of affirmative action. When you have a conversation such as this, and you say, well, when you check a box, it puts in an element of kind of looking at individuals as incompetent individuals, right? And when they go out there in the workforce, when they go out there in residency, other people are looking at them like they are really incompetent and they might only be there because of affirmative action. And they are now judged at a different level compared to other people around them. So it's very important when we have conversations like this, we realize that yes, programs like affirmative action
Thank you. I'm sorry. I apologize if I gave you the impression otherwise. You know, I believe what you're saying. I believe it's correct.
To add on to that as well, I think another key word that was not mentioned in addition to inspiration is systemic. This is a systemic issue. When you've got K through 12 systems that are not equally and equitably educating our children that are disadvantaged, giving them a disadvantage as a URM. When you've got minority students that are going and attending a primarily white school, their chances of being classified as special needs increases. We're stigmatizing them. We're failing them before they even get to the door. And then they do get through the door, and they've got to deal with microaggressions. They've got to deal with imposter syndromes, because they've been told they haven't been good enough all their lives. And so it is a systemic issue that we've got to be able to lift up and support to, once they're through the door, to make sure that they persist through that pipeline. If I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be here right now, probably. But I think that's the bigger conversation, and how do we achieve that? How do we make systemic change for a systemic issue?
I'm curious, just because it's my first time at HAPS, and when we did our exercise, you know, there was a little bit of a lack of diversity here. Does HAPS have any programs to work toward increasing faculty diversity and addressing, you know, K through 12 in the pipeline? And if not, or if you're interested in developing one of those programs, I hope you'll attend our roundtable discussions tomorrow, and we have a couple tables that will focus on such issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much for doing this exercise, because I thought, when we started, I thought it was very powerful to just show the lack of diversity we have, but I think even with this diversity that we had, even when we were done, we still had people standing. One person that was standing, which also to me reflected the fact that the groups we have, and you've alluded to that in your talk, do not represent the true diversity that we have. That, and ultimately, right, by not addressing them and by not recognizing them, we're also failing to include them, right, and to include them in everything that we do.
Thank you.
I just want to piggyback on what Larry was saying about this being a systemic problem. We can continue wherever we're at teaching to continue to blame, for lack of a better word, what happened with those students before they came to us. But at some point, we have to accept our responsibility in the moment. And we cannot continue to say, well, that's not because they got this crappy K through 12 education. The moment they're in my classroom, it's my responsibility to figure out how to support them in my classroom. And we should stop being, oh, it's too busy, we've got too much to cover. We can work it in, but we have to own that it's our responsibility to support those students. That's the beginning of how to change that systemic problem.
Last question.
Yes, I just have a comment. I'm Ruby Gaur from Aurora University, Illinois, and I have my colleagues here. So just a few points from how building mentoring programs. So we not only have very diverse faculty, which we are very proud of in our department and in our school. In addition, we have junior mentoring program that's universal, means every single student entering in junior year have a faculty mentor. So my research was on it, but it just makes us really proud. It's no color, no race, nothing. It's every student. I know we are putting it back toward freshmen, like when they enter, they get to meet us. Every one of us are trying to meet students one-on-one basis. It's hard if you have a larger, but we have a smaller school and we have smaller groups of students, so it works well for us. So it's at a foundational level. I just wanted to make that point, that it can be done and students are benefiting from it.
Great
So
job.
Thank you for all the information.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Talarico and Kira, I just have a few quick comments to make. Dr. Talarico, thank you for your elegant talk, phenomenal data that you brought together. You have clearly researched this topic much more than I'm sure anybody else in this room or anybody out there speak on this topic. You brought a lot of things to the forefront. And I want to share something with you. And you know that I teach at Southeast University, all the health professions, and we have MD students. I'm a mentor for the first year MD students. My equity and inclusion is, I cast the net to all the students. You know, present posters, come to the house, it's right here. Who were the first two that emailed me, Dr. Brooks, I want to be part of that, I want to help, I want to be volunteer, I want to do a poster. My 2 out of 52 MD students, African American females. Okay? Why am I telling you this? I got chills, guys, because what it said to me was that they know boards are past fail now, right? They have to do what they need to do to shine and own that. And I was so proud of them. It's like that's what we need to inspire our students to do, is that at this level, teaching anatomy and physiology, be your best from the get-go. Own the content, shine, and everybody works together. It doesn't matter whether you're Indian or Black or whatever. We are all working together to increase health care for everybody, regardless. And honestly, pastors, this is a call to be the best faculty you can be. Inspire your students, whoever they are, to learn anatomy. Because that's the get-go. We know anatomy is the language of the future healthcare profession. Please do our jobs and make it happen. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Talarico.
Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of announcements.